All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you who joined us bright and early out on the West Coast today. This is Matt Donaghue, Kenneth Hamilton, and Jason Duffaut from Mission Financial Planners. Um, we're going to talk about birthdays today. So it's not always we get the chance to talk about, such a fun topic, but birthdays, maybe milestones. I don't know. Milestones always sound so serious to me, but we're going to talk about key birthdays. That's going to be the focus of today's conversation. I know it's scheduled for an hour. I'd be surprised, unless we have a ton of questions, I'd be surprised if we go more than 45 minutes. We are recording today's session, so you will see this posted to our YouTube channel, hopefully within the next, 1 to 2 business days. But we do encourage you to ask questions while we're going. The way you can do that is put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. And we will most likely respond live while we're having our conversation today. But otherwise, let's jump into it. Let me just do one thing here. All right. So, Jason, Ken, Matt, here's the question we're going to throw out there to everybody on today's call. Do you know someone who is hitting one of these milestone birthdays? Okay, or maybe in the last year has hit one of these milestone birthdays and isn't quite aware of the significance of them. So if this is you, if this is someone you know, um, make sure that the next time you talk to me, Ken, or Jason, whoever is your primary planner here at Mission Financial Planners, that you take a minute and say, hey, you know what? I want you to talk to my sister or my coworker, my boss, whoever that person might be, because this is stuff that a lot of people just don't know about. So the first one, Jason, you're still 50, right?
Right.
Yeah. So age 50, and I know most of the people on the call today, 50 is definitely in the rearview mirror, and it is for me as well, but only by a couple years. Um, so at age 50, a lot of catch-ups start, right? And this is not the old, mama tomato, daddy tomato, and baby tomato are walking down the street, and baby tomato falls behind, and mama tomato gets really mad and goes back and stomps on it and says, catch up, right? It's not that. Um, Catch-up contributions are something that can get a little confusing for people, especially if they're in like a 401k, 403b, 457, those types of retirement plans at work. It's pretty straightforward if you're just making your own contribution to your IRA. You basically get to add an extra $1,000 a year. The numbers you see on the screen are the 24 numbers. I want to say the 25 numbers off the top of my head are 7,500, and then an extra 1,000. But I know everybody on this call got our key data card earlier in the year, and the number is on the key data card. So, but Ken and Jason, a lot starts happening financially in your 50s that, you know, so let's talk about this a little bit. What age 50 catch-up contributions? How many people would you say actually know that this stuff is out there unless you remind them of it?
I'll say very, very few. Very, very few. Also, most of our clients kind of, once they hit that 50th birthday, they probably don't have an empty nest yet at that point. But by 53, by 55, that nest starts to get a little bit more empty, and it's something to definitely be taking advantage of overall, especially when you're thinking about if you are about an empty nest. One of the things to be thinking about is um, FAFSA and the college applications and things to that effect. And depending on where your assets are, be it IRAs or 401ks or in your checking savings account, show up differently on those different reports. But so think about where you're putting your dollars. And again, at 50, some more doors open up for everybody.
Yeah,
But
not
yeah.
to interrupt, but I mean, a lot of people don't know, kids are going off to college in their 50s, you're maybe in your peak earnings years, you're feeling a lot of financial pressure. And one thing that people, at least I've seen, and Jason, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this. A lot of people don't realize that putting a dollar into a 401k, an IRA, an annuity, a cash value life insurance policy kind of shields it from a lot of financial planning formulas that schools and the federal government, even state governments use. And Jason, I know we've got a client we've been working with who when we brought this up from a Roth planning standpoint, they didn't know. They had no idea. Do you want to talk a little bit more? You want to add a little flavor to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the population having children later in life instead of in your early 20s, what you're seeing is a lot of that, where in lieu of a 529, where you have these massive list of restrictions that says you can't use it for this, you can't use it for that, it can only be used for education, it can only be used in this way for housing for the student. I mean, there's a lot of limitations around that, and it doesn't have dual purpose. It has one purpose: education of the child. They did put some statutory limits in where they said you could put 35,000 in a Roth after you wait 10 years for the child to be out of college and a thing to just sit there. But a good alternative is that Roth. The Roth is huge. The Roth in a retirement plan, the Roth just straight out Roth IRA, because then it has dual purpose. I mean, Matt, you have an incredibly intelligent child that does really well in school.
Wait,
And
which
there's a
one?
good chance that
I didn't know that. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
right.
Yeah,
There's a good chance you could get a full-blown scholarship.
right.
What happens to all that 529 money?
Goes to her sister.
There you
But no,
go.
I
That's
but
upside.
but I take your point though, right? Like if you're a single, if you have one child and it goes, that kid is all scholarship heavy because they're super talented in something, right?
Mhm.
Now all that money's just sitting there.
Yeah.
So,
And
but can you guys talk a little bit? I know we're big fans of Wade Pfau, and if people aren't really familiar with Wade Pfau, he's an actuary who studies retirement income planning pretty extensively. One of the things we talk about in our Social Security workshops all the time is that extra year of savings and not drawing down your funds and padding your retirement accounts, paying down some debt and all that. Walk me through, guys, at just a high level, someone, is able after age 50, because of course this doesn't stop at 60, right? Or 65 or 70. These are the new rules for you going forward. Um, what do these extra contributions potentially mean for someone who's maybe they've done really well, they still like what they do, they want to keep working, but now kids are to what you said earlier, kids are gone, right? Maybe the house is paid for. They got a bunch of extra money. They're not exactly sure what to do with it. Does it make sense to keep to overfund these things as much as possible?
Yes and no. I would say it strongly depends on what your current asset breakdown is. For example, if you've been doing all traditional 401k up to this point, well, guess what? Probably around the time of 59 and a half, not to jump ahead, things to be considering might be things like Roth conversions and such. So putting more dollars into your IRA, and already an asset that you've done a good job on, putting even more dollars into it might make it harder to do some of those Roth conversions later. Could it be going towards a more tax-free allocation that we can then use to pay for the Roth conversions overall? Uh, I'm going to say it's going to really depend on what your tax profile is today of your assets and where you want it to be by the time that you retire and where you want it to be at the end of retirement is really going to determine where you're putting those dollars.
Well, Ken, you brought up 59 and a half, so let's talk about 59 and a half. Guys, what happens at 59 and a half? Why is that so important?
You finally get the keys to the vault. You can finally touch your retirement dollars that you've been stashing away for the last 40 some odd years. Now, granted, there may be taxes associated, but the penalties are all gone, and your dollars are, as far as I'm concerned, officially your dollars.
Jason, would you add anything to that?
yeah, I think the only thing I would say is that it really opens up the door for not only to get to the pool of money that you saved, but also to reorganize, because sometimes you have a lot of assets locked up in retirement plans that have limited resources in them, meaning there's 7 or 10 funds you get to invest in, and you're unable to really line that up with what you're trying to accomplish in retirement, well, at that magical 59 and a half, you can now come out of those and go into an IRA where you have an unlimited amount of options available, and you can build like building a custom house to what you need it to be.
Yeah, and folks, I would say too is it's pretty rare that a employer sponsored plan won't let you do that. Some employer sponsors, employer sponsored plans, they have the handcuffs on you until you actually leave, right? But that's pretty rare. I'd say maybe 10%, maybe 15% of the plans we run into have those types of restrictions. So that's like Jason's saying, it gives you a chance to really start building beyond the confines of what that plan has available. I know we kind of blew past 55, but Jason, I know go ahead,
Yeah.
Ken. You
Yeah.
got something on the tip of your tongue, I can tell.
Always, always. No, this is huge for a lot of my educator clients because within 401ks and 403bs, you they may be eligible to retire with their pension as early as like age 52. But if they do that and they saved into their 403b, if they retire at 52, they can't access those dollars until 59 and a half. However, if you retire after the age of 55, you now have access to your 401k dollars, your 403b dollars at penalty free starting at 55. It's not 59 and a half, but it's only for again, you have to separate of service at the year you turn 55 in order to have that privilege. If you do retire before 54 or 54 or earlier, you lose that. So again, for some of our clients that we do early contributions, we want to retire earlier or have a second chapter in our late 50s and 60s. Again, 55 is an important year.
And Jason, you're a big fan of HSAs. Talk a little bit about HSAs and how they work.
Yeah, HSAs are diamonds in a rough. Most people just don't understand them. HSA is, in its simplest form, is just an IRA that gives you a deduction for putting money in. But if you take it out for medical expenses, we'll let you take it out tax-free. So the power of the HSA really relies around how much can you build up before you turn 65. Because when you turn 65, you go on Medicare. Now the HSA, you can't make any more contributions. So what you have is what you get. But the upside is all those future expenses you have of health come out tax-free. If you don't use it for health, you can take it just like you would on an IRA. It'd just be taxable when it comes out. So most of what we've studied and read and experienced is that as we age, we have more and more health cost, including long-term care. Believe it or not, Matt, an HSA can pay for some of the long-term care.
I believe it. I'm with you. I mean it. I believe it because it's as Jason knows, and Ken knows, I'm really into long-term care planning. And that's one of the things that people don't look at is when they build their long-term care plan out they should be doing it just like this slide is kind of saying. They should be building their long-term care plan out in their 40s and 50s, and they should be looking at all the tools that are available to them, not just buying an insurance policy. Because are there great insurance options for it? Sure, but your HSA can help offset the cost of the plan. On top of that, you should also potentially look at your home equity as well. So it's a different topic, right? I mean, we could talk for an hour on that easily. So we hit 59 and a half. Age 60. So a lot of people don't realize 60 is a big deal, especially for Social Security purposes. So, one of the things about age 60 that there's actually two important things with Social Security. This slide talks about if you are a surviving spouse, you are now eligible to get a surviving spouse benefit. Keep in mind though, Social Security does wage testing, right? So if you're $1 or if you're $2 over, I want to say the limit's about $22,000 this year. If you go $2 over, they withhold $1 in benefits from you. So if you're eligible for a surviving spouse benefit and you're making 65, 70, 75,000 a year or somewhere in there, they're just going to withhold the entire benefit anyways. But if you're not working or if you've already retired, yeah, you could take it as early as 60. The other thing people aren't aware of is the survivor benefit is the last of the benefits that can still be switched later on. So what I'm getting at there is if you have like a big personal benefit, but your spouse passed away and you don't have much earned income, it might make sense to take the surviving spouse benefit starting at 60 all the way through age 70 and then switch over to your own big benefit later on. And you can do that without any penalties or deductions. So that switching option is still there. And of course, you can flip that around too. If the survivor benefit's bigger than your benefit, well, you want to wait till your full retirement age, which is when that survivor benefit's as big as it can be. So survivors are a big deal for age 60. The other one is if you're divorced, hey, guess what? Starting after age 60, you can get remarried and not give up your divorced spouse survivor benefit. So you could have been married to a high income earner, for 10 or 12 years, something like that. The minimum is 10 years to be eligible, but you were married for 10 years. You wait till at least age 60. Now you get remarried. Well, guess what? When that high income earner passes away, you could get a survivor benefit based on the fact you were married with them for 10 years. So there's a couple big things from a Social Security standpoint that go into effect at 60. And then, of course, 62 is when most of us are eligible to take our first benefit. You will have a permanent reduction if you do file at 62. So just keep that in mind. Guys, I've been talking about Social Security for a few minutes. Who wants to talk about Medicare and our friend Irma?
JD, you're up.
Here, the tax. So IRMA is technically not a tax, but it sure does look like one. So with the IRMA, the one big difference is in our current tax system, everything is progressive. So it has brackets just like you see here. But in our tax system, as you go into a new bracket, tax is only imposed on the new dollars in that bracket. In the IRMA system, it's a cliff vesting system. So soon as your joint modified adjusted gross income is 206 and $1, you no longer pay $174.70 a month. You pay $244.60 a month, plus your Part D. So when you think about that as a couple can easily be paying $550 a month for their Medicare Part B and D. That doesn't count any supplement that they have.
What I'm going to do here too to back that up. So we mentioned the key data card a little earlier. Let me switch up my share for a second here, guys, so people can see the current numbers. And folks, we'll drop this in the chat so you've got it as well. Up here in the upper right, oops. Yeah, okay, good. Up here in the upper right, you can see, I'm looking up because that's the screen I'm sharing. Here you can see how it's affected for 25. So you can see here the Part B premium, $185, like Jason was talking about. And look what happens. You go $1 over. That's what he means by a cliff, everyone. You go $1 over. Now you're paying $259 per person for your Part B, plus an extra $1370 per person for your Part D. So those are the 25 numbers for you. And we'll
I don't think I shared it with y'all, but I was analyzing a prospect's tax return. Somebody that wasn't working with us 2 years ago, but they were literally $912 over the cliff, and so their Medicare is going to increase by about $1,500 2 years. I guess 2 years from last year, and
that is so painful.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, but maybe not thanks for sharing that, right? Like that kind of hurts. Over here, you can see the IRA numbers and the HSA numbers for this year as well, folks. So I'll drop this in the chat as we keep going here. Let me get the share back to where it needs to be, and we'll keep moving along. So Jason, any other thoughts on Medicare?
Outside of that cliff vesting, the only thing to keep in mind is when you're thinking of the IRMA, I would encourage you to think of it in timelines, meaning sometimes we have to do Roth conversions because a person's lifetime tax can be really large because they did a lot of pre-tax saving. And when we do those Roth conversions, it will affect the IRMA, but only for a short block of window. And then the rest of it goes back into the lower phase. So in some ways, you don't want to treat the IRMA like income tax because you need it to free up your income tax over your lifetime sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that gets into the Nate, and Ken kind of alluded to it. Jason, you pretty much said it. If you're going to do a tax management strategy, you can't just be looking at state or federal income taxes. You got to be looking at this stuff too, because it can also blow up your Social Security income. Believe it or not, you could blow up the tax rate on that too, if you're not careful. All right, so what can you guys see now? Can you still see the age 65? Are we back to the PowerPoint at this point? Okay, great. Let me keep moving. Social Security. So in 24, the maximum monthly benefit is for age 67 is 38.22. There's still a few people out there who 66 and 10 or 11 months is still their full retirement age, but those are pretty much all gone at this point. So you'll see next year when we do this presentation, it's 67 is what we'll be referencing. And 67 is full retirement age for a lot of people. The maximum benefit, though, for people hitting full retirement age in 2024 was 38.22, like you can see on the screen there. And for 2025, it's I want to say it's 4208 is the number. So you're right around $4,000 a month from Social Security if you're a max earner. And then at age 70, that is when you have the maximum possible you could get out of Social Security. Now, just remember, you have to wait till 70 to get that benefit at that point. But at age 70, you would get about $5,100 a month. 5,108 is the maximum you could get if you were turning 70 this year. So doesn't make any sense to wait beyond 70 with all the Social Security workshops we do. I think we probably run into one person about every 18 months who's like 73 and still waiting. And it's like, you don't wait. Stop. What are you doing? Just take it. Well, I don't need it. Take it and do something with it. Donate it. Give the money away. You paid into that system for a very long time. You should absolutely be doing something with that money because I view it as you're essentially buying an annuity from the federal government by contributing to Social Security. It's your annuity. Make the best out of it. Do what you can with it. RMDs. So RMDs are, oh, sorry, Ken, were you going to add something?
Yes. If you can go back to 70, one thing that will update for future is this is the first year, it's technically 70 and a half, is where you can do qualified charitable distributions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you that are charitably inclined and maybe you have a church close to your heart or something, whatever it may be, you can take distributions directly from your IRAs. You don't pay any taxes on it. It satisfies RMDs, which is for what we'll be talking about next. But let's say you give $8,000 a year to the church. Well, you would have needed to have liquidated about $10,000 from your IRA to get the $8,000 to then get to the church. The qualified charitable distribution lets you to give that full 10, and now the church just got a 20% raise, and you were going to liquidate the 10 anyway to give them the 8. Well, again, at 70 and a half, the year you turn 70 and a half, all that opens up for you.
That is a great point, Ken. That's a great point. And folks, with that, it just needs to be a legitimate charity, right? They got to have a tax ID number because it does get reported. It does not count as taxable income to you, but it does count as your RMD. I know Ken said that, but just to drive that point home again. Speaking of RMDs then, so let's talk RMDs. The RMD age is in a state of flux, right? So who wants to take RMDs?
I can take RMDs.
Okay.
So you're right, the RMD is in a state of flux because now it's 73 and it's going to graduate to 75 over the next coming years. I believe it's a 10-year window that they graduated from when they passed the Secure Act. So you're going to go from 73 to 75. a lot of people thought that was a great thing because they could delay that RMD and not have to take that, taxable income that they may or may not need. The challenge with it has been what we've seen is that now instead of taking a number that looks like this at 70 and a half, now I'm taking a number that looks like this at 75, which is a much bigger number than I was going to take at 70 and a half. And for some folks that have a lot of pre-tax dollars, it really makes their tax management unbearable.
So what do you mean by that?
I mean, they get in a position where the way the IRS calculates your RMD is they have a factor they use, and every time you get older, the factor gets smaller. So every year the factor gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the closer you are to, let's say, age 110, the smaller the number gets. So maybe at 82, you might be taking 7 or 8%. Where we're at 7, we got 17.7 as our factor, 18.5 is our factor at 82. So when you look at that, that's equivalency of 5.4% coming out of your large IRA or qualified plan.
And you don't have a choice, do you? Now they used to have a 50% penalty if you didn't take the money out. It's gone down to a 25% penalty. But it's still a 25% penalty. And then that kind of creates a negative feedback loop in and of itself, because what we were just talking about with Medicare, your income tax rate, well, the money's got to come from somewhere to pay the 25% penalty. So you end up taking more out, and that does not count towards your RMD. That just counts as paying the penalty because you still have to take the RMD amount out. So you don't want to miss this, right? You don't want to be like, oh, I forgot, because it's going to blow up your income for at least a 12-month period, or your tax rate, I should say, for at least a 12-month period if you do. What else, this is kind of the end of the formal deck itself, but what else should people be thinking about as they are getting into their 70s from a tax planning standpoint, guys?
From a tax planning standpoint, is that 13 to 15-year window from 60 to 75 is one of the most important timeframes to be making financial movements, if you will, to categorize your assets the way that you would want it to be, your tax profile. It's the most flexibility you're ever going to have. And where you're contributing dollars. For a lot of our households, I encourage stop contributions to things like your traditional IRA around 55, definitely by 60, because you're putting it in and you're going to need to be taking it right back out with taxes. We probably need to be levelizing more of your tax-free assets, as well as some of your more flexible taxable brokerage kind of investments. But that 15-year runway is huge. And we meet so many households that are in their late 60s and early 70s that the time is gone. You only get 1 year at a time to do some of these movements without breaking into upper limits. And as we all know, time's one of the most valuable things that each of us have. And this is one of the things that you could be investing into.
Jason, what would you add?
And I will tackle the other side of that coin. What if you're too late, Matt? You're already 75, right? You haven't done what you needed to do because you weren't getting good counsel. Is there anything you can do now? I would tell you that a lot of people, not only do they need to think about their tax profile, but they need to think about, if I'm going to leave this money to someone, how do I leave it to them in the best way? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Example one is tax profile shifting. I don't want it in my tax profile anymore. I want it in my kids' tax profile. I'm never going to spend all this money. Why don't I start gifting it now and get it out of my tax profile and get it in their tax profile? So, because my kid may have a lower tax profile than I have, especially if I'm taking $100,000+ of RMDs. Right?
Hey, we're doing that for someone right now.
Yeah,
right?
because what was
So
the alternative?
the alternative is they pay taxes on it while they're alive, and then their kids pay taxes on it for 10 years if they're taking the money out over a 10-year period of time. But even if they wait till the end of the 10 years that they have to take the money out, they got to pay taxes in a huge lump sum if they wait. And so what Jason, I don't want to paraphrase or speak for you, of course, but everybody, what Jason's saying is you've got some decisions you've got to make in terms of how do you want to leave things when you're gone. And if you're the type of person who really doesn't care, hey, that's okay, right? That's fine. And we certainly run into people like that, but most people care. And most people look at it and go, hey, you know what? If I could have shifted money over for the last 10 years of my life and it ends up saving my kids $500,000 of tax bills on my money, you're still saving $500,000 of taxes on your money. You just didn't live to see it, is all. And that's a big leap for some people, right? Because some people have the attitude, hey, when I'm dead, I'm dead, I won't care. But your kids will care. I mean, I can promise you they'll care. So
Well, and we have a friend that says, "Hey, you like paying taxes that much? What government agency is your favorite government agency to give the money
yeah,
to?"
yeah, exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
the other thing I would add to this conversation too, Matt, is it too late? Is when you think about the Secure Act, like you just mentioned a minute ago, the the crux to that is you have a big IRA, you give it to your two girls, and they have to get it out in 10 years. It
Mhm.
used to be they could stretch it over their entire lifetime, which the compounding of that is huge, right?
Yeah.
When you think about compounding. So they basically divorced you from that option and said, hey, we want our tax dollars, get it out in a 10-year window. Well, one of the workarounds to that is to use some charitable planning. You can still give stuff to your kids, but just give some to charity too, to give it to your kids. And we have designs that we've done in the past with clients where we say, hey, you get a large IRA, great, we're going to give it to this charitable structure and it's going to pay your kids an income for a period of time, longer than 10 years. And the remainder will go to the charity.
And that's the
That
key.
way you can get that compounding.
A lot of people hear that term or hear the term charitable remainder, annuity trust, unit trust, charitable remainder trust, right? The thing is the charity's getting the remainder, right? The kids are getting the income, and I think a lot of people, I don't know, Jason, you deal with it more than I do. I think a lot of people get a little confused by that, right? Like, you know, you want your kids to get the money in the best tax advantage situation possible. Is a lump sum the best way to do it? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's great for the IRS.
It's good for them. Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's good
yeah,
for them.
I mean, they definitely get a good deal out of it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people get concerned about the remainder man going to the charity from that end. And you really have to probably be charitably inclined to relate to those concepts of charitable remainder trust. But in its truest form, mathematically, when you look at it over time, it's much better than the Secure Act.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing too, going back to Ken's point, moving money into Roths, moving money into permanent insurance, in your 40s and 50s to kind of pre-plan this to lock in the tax advantages while you're young and able to do it. Um, as you guys know, that's something I did in my 40s. My wife and I went in all in on Roth IRAs, and yeah, we're paying a higher tax bill now. I've got a permanent insurance policy that I put a fair amount of money into every year. My wife's getting hers this year, right? It's something that from a long-term legacy planning standpoint, ideally what will happen when we pass away is our kids, every last penny they're going to get is tax-free to them. And why is that possible? Because we started setting it up in our 40s and 50s. We didn't wait till our 70s to start doing it. And a little bit now, Ken always uses this expression, right? Would you rather pay for the seed or would you rather have the seed or the harvest? I think everybody would rather have the harvest, right? But what did the seeds cost you? A fraction of what that harvest would cost, right? So, and I don't care if you're in your 70s doing charitable planning, like what Jason's talking about, or you're a little younger trying to take advantage of Roth IRAs and stuff like that. Regardless, you've got an opportunity to set things up in the best way possible. And maybe more importantly than the best way possible is the best way for you. Because what's important to me is not necessarily what's important to Ken, what's not necessarily important to Jason, right? We all have different goals. We're all different people. We're all different life stages, things like that. And you are too, everyone on this call. You're all in different life stages. Ken, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts on this?
Everything you'd like to add? The only slide I wish we also had was one with question marks. Because
Ah,
the other most important age is before that first major medical event. Um, it's something is going to happen at some point over a lifetime, and there's going to be a before and there's going to be an after. The thing is you can only be prepared if you do it in advance. And so all these things are very important, but knowing how your life's going to be before that event and after that event uh, is worth discussing.
yeah, guys, we have a little time. We got about 5 minutes. You want to take a minute and talk about how critically important it is to have a robust estate plan in place. And guys, when I say robust, I'm not necessarily meaning complex, just covers all the bases. You guys take a few minutes and talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so let me pose a question to you, Ken. If I don't have a will, a trust, medical, uh, power of attorney to deal with my financial directives, and I get hit coming out of this complex today and can't make any decisions because I have head trauma, what happens next?
So what happens next is there's going to be bills. There's going to be things that need to happen, and your partner does not have the ability to have any access to your IRAs. The IRA stands for individual retirement account, and you are the individual and you are alive, but you're incapacitated. So if for any reason we need access to those dollars without that power of attorney, again, Jen doesn't have the ability to get into it. Um, we had a client pass away overseas, and a lot of those transfers can't happen until the certificate of death is in hand. And sometimes it can take months upon an emergency happening to get those hands on those documents. So the power of attorney, again, would also fill the gaps in those moments to have access to these dollars.
Guys, I'll throw a softball question at you. Should everybody have a will and a trust?
Yes.
How come?
A trust, again, provides that clear instruction of who gets the dollars, when somebody can step in and act as the trustee and make those financial choices. And the will should point everything towards the trust, because you might forget an asset, or you may have purchased a vehicle or property and haven't had a chance to update that trust to get it fully funded and in there. Well, the will get it into the trust and provide that level of security.
Jason, how important is that
That's
trust?
the trust is pretty important. I mean, you can go through probate with no will, honestly, in the state of Texas. And in most states, they have something called intestate law, which basically says we've made up a will for you if you don't have one, and we'll just follow this one because you didn't have one. And they'll go through the probate process and however long that lasts. Every state is different, and every state is different by the dynamic of what we're going through. So what I'll explain to you about that is the state of Texas is a pretty fast probate process in general. My mother-in-law passed away during COVID. She had very little assets. She went through the in-state process, not because because I wanted her to, because we just couldn't get the documents in place and everything else. But, people make their own choices. But that process, even on an estate that was a small estate, still took more than 6 months to get through. And with an estate as small as that, let's call it 50,000, you still have to pay an attorney $6,000. So when you think about that, and that's a small estate, what do you think the attorney is going to charge for a $250,000 estate? How about a $2 million estate?
Yeah, so folks, the biggest thing I'd take out of that is make sure you have it in place. The only thing I would add, guys, is when your minor children are adults at 18 legally, guess what? They need to have this stuff in place too. You probably need to buy it for them, but they need to have a will, trust, medical directive, and a power of attorney in place as well. Because if your kid gets injured or sick and they're laying in a hospital bed, the state has to follow, the hospital has to follow the state rules, regardless of what you say as their parent. And I know that sounds messed up. Like Ken said, though, with the IRA, I know it sounds messed up. You might have been married for 40 years. The tax or the laws on the IRAs, they don't care. It stands for individual. The person whose name that's in is the only person who can make decisions. If you have a life insurance policy or some type of policy that you would access for living benefits, right? If that individual, the owner, is laying in a hospital bed and can't do anything, guess what? You can't access those benefits because they're the one who has to sign off on accessing the benefits. How are they going to do that if you don't have how are you going to get access to it if there isn't a power of attorney in place? You're not. Alternatively, maybe your trust should own it and you as the co-trustee would be able to get in and do it, right? But that's something that not everybody thinks about when they put a trust in place. So questions, Ken, we don't have a big question mark screen here, but the last 10 minutes here has been all about making sure you've got a good plan in place. And I hope that's what everybody takes out of this. We covered a lot of ground today in 45 minutes, 50 to end of life, basically. If there were, Ken, what are three big takeaways you hope people get out of today's webinar?
First big takeaway, or really, I think the big takeaway is between 60 and 75. If you are not shifting your tax profile, you're probably missing out on huge opportunities. Simple as that.
Okay. Jason, what's the big takeaway people should have?
I think the big takeaway is the system and the tax code is layered with opportunities. If you're not taking advantage of them, that's because you're not getting good counsel.
So I'm gonna end on what Jason said, and it comes down to this: if you are working with someone who is not covering these bases with you, someone who's not doing things like mailing out a key data card to you every year to make sure you've got the 25 numbers like what we dropped in the chat a few minutes ago, someone who's not doing education events for you, someone who's not proactively reaching out to you to say, hey, you know what? We got to start making some decisions on this. When's a good time to talk? You're working with the wrong person. And I can't tell you how many people I've met over the years who've said, well, I really like my person. I really like him or her. I like them a lot. They're really nice. And I've never asked about it. Folks, it's not your job to ask the question. It's their job to ask the question. And if they're not asking the question, what are you thinking about Social Security? Have you been taking advantage of your catch-up provisions in your 401k or even just with your IRA? Have you thought at all about updating your will or trust? I know it's been a while since we had a conversation about that. Have you thought at all about how we're really going to pass money on when you pass away? Have we really done a tax analysis this year? If you're working with someone who doesn't do those things, you need to give us a call. If you know someone who has an advisor that they're super frustrated with because these things don't happen, have them give us a call. We'd be happy to have the conversation. But with that, so big takeaways are start planning, right? Actually do it. That's probably the second thing. And then the third thing is Who else should be doing this? Who else is hitting some of these key birthdays that we should be talking to? We'll all follow up with you in the next day or so to see what specific questions you have. I know we got a couple things in the chat. Let me just see what those are. Ken and Gary have been talking. Okay, so that's good. Key data card went out a couple times. Ken, do you think you could email that over to Gary as well?
You got it.
Okay, cool. So Gary, Ken will email you a copy of that key data card so you can see that. But otherwise, everyone, thank you so much. Give us a call. We will also be following up with everybody who attended today's workshop. So thank you so much.